All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Stephen Foskett, organizer of Tech Field Day and publisher of Gestalt IT. And we are here in San Jose at NetApp headquarters to wrap up our wonderful day, special Cloud Field Day event focused on multi-cloud. This morning, we heard from some NetApp folks about the reality of enterprise multi-cloud needs. We saw some really great interactive and practical demonstrations of how it all works. And now we're going to hear from a great partner and a great name in the event, and frankly, somebody that is a friend of ours here from Google Cloud to learn a little bit more about how they work with NetApp in this multi-cloud environment. All of these sessions are recorded. As I said earlier, you can catch any of the recordings right now on LinkedIn. You'll also find these recordings on YouTube, on NetApp TV, and probably in a lot of other places besides. If you're wondering what this is all about, you can go to techfieldday.com and click there to learn more about what Tech Field Day is and how you could become a presenter or a delegate in the future. And if you have any questions or comments about the event, again, I'm Stephen Foskett, and I would love to hear from you. You can find me on most social media channels as Foskett. So I'm going to turn it over to Phoebe and Drew and get a chance to get started here with Sean and Google.
Well, thank you. I'm so excited to be wrapping up our content today with our great partners, Google. Google has been a NetApp partner, and you know, we've been friends for a really long time from an engineering perspective. So I'm really excited to be joined today by Sean Darrington and Dean Hildebrand. So I'm going to firstly, I guess, introduce, I'd ask you to introduce yourself, guys. So Sean, let's start with you. I guess a little bit about your history so that people know who you are and kind of where you're coming from.
Yeah, so Sean Darrington, product management at Google Cloud now, focusing on our storage solutions and do a lot of work with NetApp as a company and a partner of Google Cloud. Longtime storage industry, veteran 25 years, Veritas and Symantec and storage startup at Exablocks and so forth. This is my 7th Tech Field Day with Stephen Foskett and team. And actually, Stephen and I did the very first Tech Field Day way back when with Veritas and 3PAR on thin provisioning. So it's great to be back.
Yeah, and Dean, I'm really excited to have you because I talk all the time about NFS and file services and Google, obviously. And you have just such a history in that area, so maybe introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dean Hildebrand. I'm in the Google office of the CTO. Yeah, and I started school at an interesting time, right when we were redefining the NFS protocol around NFS 4. And so a lot of the work I did at that time was around scaling up NFS. And then a lot of those changes got into NFS 4.1 and then started defining the NFS 4.2 protocol as well at that time. So that was lots of fun. And then I went over to IBM Research and worked in primarily HPC storage there for over 10 years. And then eventually in their cloud storage offerings as well. And then now I'm at Google, like I said. I'm a technical director working on our file block and object storage strategy.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's great to have you both here today. Tech Field Day is not meant to date us, but it's so exciting to hear about the history and your backgrounds because I think that's what informs a lot of our future direction as well. So, Sean, you've seen the, well, let's start with you. So we're talking about file services primarily in Google today and Google Cloud Storage as well. What are some of the use cases you're seeing for file in particular in Google Cloud today?
You know, it's a lot of the same things we see on premises, because as you were talking about earlier in the show this morning, you know, there are digital native companies that are born in the cloud, and then there are a lot of companies that are on premises coming to the cloud. And with the vast amount of data being unstructured on premises, it's a good opportunity to move it into the cloud and kind of keep that same structure. And sometimes you're going to rewrite applications and so forth. But you know, some of the main use cases around disaster recovery, right, and particularly with NetApp on premises replicating to NetApp CBO in the cloud, it's a good opportunity to get the data in synchronous modes between on-prem and cloud, failover capabilities, run compute and storage where is needed. A lot of the same verticals. We see a lot of success in financial services, retail, healthcare. Even EDA is an example, right? There are companies that are able to leverage NetApp on premises and have for years, but now they have the opportunity to leverage like CVO with FlexCache in the cloud for bursting workloads. So there's a different way that people can think about leveraging cloud assets as they continue to leverage on-premises assets. And one of the other big things is healthcare. That we see a lot of companies using that, particularly around NetApp file services, where one company in particular is a global company. They have petabytes of NetApp file services across 80 different locations worldwide. And we're now in the process of centralizing all that within 6 Google regions, and they're using NetApp CVO in Google Cloud with the combination of the edge cache that you heard earlier this morning, used to be global file cache, for the file serving. So now they're able to minimize their operational costs by getting rid of some of the hardware that was aging out already, but now they're actually leveraging a new way to manage that data more efficiently.
Right, so it's a lot of the the typical use cases for moving to the cloud and having the storage and having the file services available in the cloud just like they are on premises, and that the ease of not just setting them up, but I imagine managing them as well when you're trying to learn this whole new architecture of cloud, right?
Yep.
Okay, and is there something that customers look for in the cloud that that they want because they're used to it on premises, or is there a change in the perspective of the way that they architect these environments?
I think it really, what we've seen is it really depends on where that company is in kind of their process of migrating to the cloud, whether it be an all or nothing, or they're moving and they have multi-year strategy to do this, because companies will run a combination of VMs on our compute engine. They may be rewriting applications for Kubernetes, which you heard about earlier this morning as well. Or they may just want to continue to leverage VMware with GCVE. So it kind of depends on where they're coming from in terms of if they're going to think about things differently. But with CVO, they have all the bells and whistles that they're used to on premises, right? And they're able to leverage a lot of the same APIs to do some advanced things. Or they may want to go down a fully managed storage route with Cloud Volume Service. So not all the features, but you're going to have some trade-offs in terms of ease of administration, directly integrate with the console versus kind of do it yourself. So it just depends on where companies are. We see it really across the board.
Yeah, right. It's that multi-cloud journey or the cloud journey that we talk about and where they are. Do you find that, like you mentioned, cloud native customers, do you find that they're leaning towards, and I don't know if either of you want to answer this, do you find that they're leaning towards file as a storage service, or is there preference there to, to use other things like object?
Yeah, I mean, we're big believers in using the right tool for the job, right? And so for whatever workload they have, right, they really need to use the specific storage service that meets their needs. And so, object and file have been on different journeys, I would say, over the last 5 years in cloud, where object is really trying to play to its core strengths around flexibility, scalability, and global access of the data. And then they really want to focus on their core use cases, which is around content distribution, data analytics, and data preservation. And so, and delivering all of that at a very low cost. Whereas in file, it's been on its own journey where all of the data management capabilities that exist on-prem, right? We've been moving them into cloud, making them easy to use, easy to consume, work for non-NetApp experts, right? That really just don't want to think about so much about the data management side and really want to focus on their applications. So, and we've had a lot of success there as well around delivering, dependable SLAs and RPO and RTO times, and separating out IOPS and bandwidth from capacity in terms of how they buy these things. So, we've been a long way down that road, but the other thing that file has is a very specific API, right, around POSIX. It also has its own data sharing semantics that between different users, and then as well as a low latency performance access. So, something that you're much more similar to on-prem, and even when you're in the cloud, versus object, which is a much higher latency and really designed for larger objects. And so, when we talk to customers around what workloads that they have and where they want to bring them, it's really about looking at those types of capabilities that the different services provide, and doing the match into each one of them, right? And both of them are, again, the first-class citizens in the cloud.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So, Sean, I want to kind of take a segue here, just because I think some of our viewers maybe aren't familiar with Google Cloud, and I know that you have other storage services. So we mentioned Google, object storage as well as file. Can you just maybe give a rundown of what those cloud storage services are in Google, just so that we are all on the same plane?
Yeah, so there's, depending on the application, again, there's a combination of object or block or file services that we have. Dean was talking about cloud storage. That's obviously our object storage, which is designed for the types of applications Dean was mentioning. It's also built on the infrastructure that we use for our other services in Google, like Photos and Gmail and other things called Colossus, which is really just a cluster file system that is planet scale. Persistent disk is our block storage offering. And there are a variety of persistent disk options based upon capacity and performance and compute size and so forth that people can choose to use in GCE or in other cases. And then File Store is our native, just our fully managed NFS storage service. It's a file storage service that customers can use. But one of the things with Google Cloud is that we do have an open ecosystem, and that's one of the reasons we've been partnering with NetApp for years, is that we want to do what's right for the customer. And not everything that Google has is going to be right for the customer, and so we try to figure out what that right option is based upon, in this case, file needs, and maybe it's File Store, but and sometimes it might be also CVO or it might be CVS from NetApp. And so that's really an approach that we have for an open partner ecosystem, in addition to backup services that we have that is integrated into the Cloud Console for us to provide, but we work with Veeam and Commvault and others as well, again, with that mindset of an open ecosystem.
Okay, yeah, and that's a really interesting, I want to kind of dive into, when you say an open ecosystem from a Google, what does that mean from Google Cloud? Does that mean that you let people build things on top of Google Cloud and then sell it through the Google console, or is there something more integrated than that?
Yeah, well, in this case, with NetApp and Google Cloud, it's more integrated than that. A lot of times customers can, they can build and deploy things on their own in Google Cloud, and that's one way to do it. They can also buy things through the marketplace, which is one of the things that the two companies have a relationship with, and that oftentimes helps customers with how they're going to spend, how they're going to think about, what kind of service levels are associated with support of those products that are in marketplace. And then, in the case of NetApp and Google Cloud right now, we actually have sales teams that are focused on selling each other's products, right? So, within NetApp, there's a team that's compensated for selling CVO or CVS in Google Cloud, and similarly within Google Cloud, we have teams that are compensated on selling NetApp in Google Cloud. And so from that perspective, people can buy it through the marketplace, and they can use, and they know that there's a joint support SLA associated with that.
Yeah, support's definitely one of the big ones for, I guess, for customers, especially moving into the cloud, where it's the last thing you want to think about is who do I call if something's not working, right? So can you talk a little bit more about that relationship between Google and I think I'd like to hear from both of you about this, because I think there is both, like you mentioned, the sales partnership and the marketplace partnership, but there's also a pretty deep engineering partnership too. So Dean, maybe you could talk a little bit about what's that been like with NetApp over the last couple of decades?
Yeah, I mean, I think we started working together at an engineer-to-engineer level probably around 2017 or 18. And, things, I think, got really close and really, working as one team, right, to deliver the services that we have on the platform. Specifically, we built a brand new service with CVS where, it's a Kubernetes-based ONTAP service that, users can now use across our entire platform. And that really required both engineers sitting in the same room for over a year or 2 years, sitting down, talking to each other, working through all the issues, right, in terms of getting the technologies to work together, the networking, even right into the Kubernetes tech leads in order to modify the platform that we had in terms of adapting to some of the NFS and SMB needs that are requirements that are needed. And I think that's been rewarded on both sides in terms of we've had internal engineering awards given to teams inside of Google for the great partnership that we've had. I think the same thing has happened on the other side as well. And we've been have Partners of the Year awards together and all these different things. So I think that it's been a really productive and super amazing partnership where I think both engineers on both sides have learned a ton.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the other thing going forward, like the Google Cloud PMs and engineering and NetApp PMs and engineering on both sides, there's a lot of interaction almost on a daily, if not weekly, if not daily basis on roadmap items. What are we going to do? And that really comes light in like Cloud Volume Services, right? It's directly integrated into Google Cloud's console. So customers don't have to install anything. They just, on the left-hand nav, can navigate down to Cloud Volume Service and choose a capacity and region and deploy it. But that's also leading into things that we're going to be bringing out in the future as well for prioritization about what are customers wanting. And so as we work in these joint opportunities with customers about their migration to the cloud, whether it be a migration or a hybrid deployment, it really influences from a product perspective which features do we prioritize to deliver first based upon both teams' inputs and priorities.
Can I ask if you can talk about any of maybe a feature or a capability that has been added to Cloud Volume Service as a result of a joint customer?
You can ask, but we'll have to say that for next field day.
Okay. Okay, sure. Yeah, and so the other thing I want to touch on is you mentioned earlier, Sean, about how the sales teams are really tightly integrated. And I want to ask about Google Cloud approaching some of these workloads. What are you, when customers are coming to you and asking about migrating into Google Cloud, and one of the things that they have behind that is some storage requirement. What are some of the things that you're finding that the teams are able to do together to solve that customer or to get to the customer's requirements, requirements?
Well, I think, oftentimes the conversation with the customer is much bigger than I have a storage project. And so that's actually a good thing because that opens up the door for a lot of conversations, a lot of possibilities about what can we do in what scenario and how much can we do when. And then it really gets into a prioritization and planning perspective for what's the customer's most important priorities. Sometimes it's the data center evacuation. Sometimes it's I want to move this cloud, solve a DR problem. I need to get out of my second data center. I want to stay in my primary. I want to move different workloads to the cloud based upon my VMware, and I want to run that in GCVE, right? So it really just depends upon the priorities of the customers, but those conversations that are much broader than a specific storage project really opens the doors to bigger opportunities.
Sure. Okay. And I guess I want to kind of look into the future of those opportunities and where you see your customers. What are those kinds of workloads that they're starting to lean towards? So they may have started with a backup or a DR workload because that's a nice way to get started and to see what the cloud is like and if it's going to work for them. But what are they asking for you now, if we can get a little bit more specific?
Do you want to chime in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll add in a few. I think to your point, right? I mean, I think it started off, everyone at some level on some workloads started off very slowly, making sure that everything's working right. And now I think we're seeing the transition to saying, well, actually, maybe I can either use the cloud as the first, the only existence for this workload instead of having to use it. But then a lot of others are saying, well, actually, my gateway into cloud is through bursting. And so being able to burst out and put pipelines in that can burst out to cloud, leverage the compute resources inside of cloud, and then at the end of the day, they can quickly shut it all down. But then that becomes its own gateway into saying, well, okay, well now that you're bursting, that requires a lot of data movement, that requires a lot of management from that side. What if we just moved everything into cloud on a per workload basis? And so now we are seeing design workstations coming up in the cloud, again, get access to GPUs and these types of things. And so a lot more of what did happen on the desktop, I think, is now happening inside the cloud. And that becomes the place of generation of the data. And then that becomes the place where they can now run, let's say, larger batch workloads or pipelines based on that created data. Which then leads down through the entire pipeline. And so, I think that this evolution as the trust that we've been building over the last several years is starting to sort of reap the hybrid and the all-in type workloads. Anything to add or no?
Well said.
Oh, yeah. Well, there you go.
Well, I want to ask then, I mean, we started talking about file services and you mentioned NFS and how it has been around for a really long time. How do you find that protocol is, what do you see happening with NFS? Is it reached its potential, or is there still more to come?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of people confuse the implementation of a server or the implementation of an NFS client with the actual protocol itself, and it's a little bit confusing to know where one ends and one begins. And so a lot of people's perceptions of like, oh, this is NFS storage, it works this way, is more based on, on-prem, they use some version of it, or they had some old thing, or whatever they were doing. And so I think we're really in cloud trying to change the mindset a little bit about saying, well, actually, this type of behavior isn't fixed towards the protocol, meaning like if you did want to set up a service and have it automatically grow over time as you start easing data, you can do that with an NFS-based offering, right? There's a lot of different things you can do that are completely separate than the protocol, and I think we're discovering those as we go through this journey over the last several years to really say, well, what are the customer, like right now, they're really looking for that high level of data protection, the data management services, and make sure that everything's safe. And but I think once we get through all of that, it'll be a lot more around, okay, I have a global team. I need to access data from these different locations. I really need to figure out how to leverage the benefits of cloud to get my team working together and getting them leveraging all the cloud resources, as we talked before. Then that becomes the interesting questions to have. And I think at this point, we don't see any reason why NFS or SMB and whatever cannot, follow us along into that journey, again, to enable those key parts of the workloads and the APIs that people expect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good thing to know as well, knowing I don't have to learn another skill.
Yeah, and if you want to, right, I think the key that we're trying to get across is like, if you want to learn and you want to use different aspects of things, go ahead, this is great. But don't feel like it's an obligation in order to take advantages of cloud and the flexibility and the scalability, right? That is like really want to separate out that that file storage can, meet all of the needs and deliver on the promise of what cloud is out there delivering.
Yeah.
I'm going to break the ice of
Please.
the U-shaped crew here.
Fantastic. We actually were enjoying that. It's a good intro to questions that can lead us in there. One of the things with storage in cloud, especially when you get into file storage and the abstraction equals performance loss. No matter how you slice it, every layer of abstraction, there's a sense of inability to measure or get top performance. And we get distributed cloud storage, there's a fear that us on-prem folks, right, team bare metal, we love managed latency, controlled latency, and there's a sensation, human sensation, that we will lose that control or capability when we go to the cloud. Can we talk about what you're doing both with ONTAP and the partnership with NetApp to make sure that you can maintain those SLAs, SLOs, and that we don't just think it's going to get spread all over some data center and we're going to get these disturbing latencies that we can't point to? Because that's also the thing, is that we can go back and I can say, now I know what happened, but when I move to cloud-based storage, maybe I'm wrong. I lose that capability to get that observability to say, like, at this point in time, this specific thing happened which spiked latency, which caused, second-tier cache problems. Right. I can go on all day about performance and cache. It's kind of a thing that's close to home for me, but that's a human problem that we love metal. We love to know that I can go, I can touch it, I can throw observability at it, and I can see exactly what happened when. And I feel like I lose that sometimes when I go to cloud-based services. No offense.
Yeah, if we were just talking about it, it's actually a trade-off, right? I mean, all of the, I shouldn't say all of it, but a lot of the NetApp admins on premises, they love to figure out how many spindles are going to be in a box, what's the ratio, what's the utilization, how many IOPS per spindle, how do I size it, what's the cache hit ratio, all that good stuff that everybody's used to doing.
Is it SATA? Is it SAS? I want to know.
Is it 5,400 RPM or 7,200 RPM? Am I going to save a few dollars by going with slower driving? Can I still get the IOPS that I need out of it,
Cheap
right?
and deep, fire and wide, yeah.
It's one of those trade-offs that you don't have to worry about that anymore, right? So even if you're using CVO in Google Cloud, you're going to run that on persistent disk underneath the covers. You're going to run that on a compute size and instance type with X amount of vCPU and memory and so forth. And so you have to think about things differently as a service that you're almost subscribing to, and you can size that service how you'd like to. And there are SLAs that go along with those services, right? So like CVO is like a 4.9 SLA, and depending on how you deploy CVO in an HA pair, you can deploy that across 2 different zones within a region, and now you're actually increasing the level of 9's availability that you can actually count on. And so we were just talking about that a little bit earlier, working on a project with a customer, and the customer's steeped in an app sizing, and it's like, well, that's not how it works on premises. And go through that explanation about it's a different way about thinking about a service that you're actually going to run on, in this case, CVO, in the cloud. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Well, I was just going to add that I think what that does, though, is it puts the onus on us to deliver. right? So to your point, right, is well, I'm going to get these crazy tail latencies or something to that effect. How do I know that I'm getting them, and how do I react when they occur? So I think that puts the onus on us to say, look, we're giving you this service. We should be open about what it actually is in the sense of what is its latency profile, what is its performance characteristics, how do you achieve those performance characteristics? So we publish benchmarks, for example, on our website to say, hey, look, you're not getting the right performance, run this. If you're still not getting, if it's not achieving it, that's a bug. And so we really try to build up this I think, partnership basically with customers and partners to say, if you're not achieving this, it's a bug. And they're like, whoa, wait a second, what do you mean a bug? I'm like, it's an actual bug. Like, open the bug because you're not getting it. And they're like, well, I just figured it was slow at this point. Yeah, it might be slow at this point, but that's not supposed to happen, right? It's going to happen, but it's not something that's supposed to. So I think that's where it really is about, sort of building that trust that the numbers we say you're going to get, and therefore, does it matter if it, is, SAS or SATA or has some sort of write back cache in the middle of it or whatever. I mean, as long as it's achieving, I think, the sort of promise that you care for. Plus the monitoring, which is, to your point of, I think that's something where cloud traditionally has done really well in terms of monitoring, but when to your point of like, well, I can monitor the higher level, but now I want more detailed, and I think that's something that we're evolving over time to add more and more granular statistics, I/O latency profiles. The one thing that I've had people that are used to on-prem is say, like, I wrapped up a bunch of stuff together, I built a dashboard in 10 minutes, and now I'm observing the latencies of like all of my VMs. They're like, this would have taken me 2 days, with Grafana and all these other things before, and now I just sort of did it through some point and clicks.
And even be able to see like a specific workload that could get an extremely, terrifying cliff on the missed ratio curve, at a certain allocation level. Like, oh, I could move that around. I could choose a better way in which I could allocate storage to that, but it's tough to get that visibility from the cloud consumer side.
Yeah, one example I was going to give is on our block storage as an example. We actually have a monitoring of how often you've hit the limit. And so you actually know whether or not you're hitting the limit or not. And if you are, then maybe you need to increase the size or pay for more IOPS or something along that side, right? Depending if you're unhappy about that. Because a lot of folks are like, no, I'm not hitting the limit, except, well, in fact, you have a very bursty workload and you just couldn't see it in the monitoring because it's not granular enough. And so, we try to build more and more of those types of metrics back to the
Could you talk about, sorry.
Oh, no.
Could you talk about, I love these stories about kind of like how the mindset has to change from being how we've had to do things and control them on-prem, and now we can control different things from a higher level. So do you have any more examples of customers that may have come to you with this same type of fear and how you've kind of been able to help them through that?
It's a good segue because Dean had mentioned like the onus is on us to deliver a service, right? And one of the services that we deliver really well are networking services. So there are over 130 points of presence where customers can get into the Google network. And that healthcare company I was talking about earlier, where we were sizing, removing multiple petabytes of filers across 80 locations. The original design was actually we were going to put a Cloud Volume Edge cache at each of the locations. However, in the larger regional centers that they had, we are able to actually eliminate the edge cache altogether because they can get onto the network, just run it directly in the cloud. And so now the users' data is in the cloud in one of the 6 regions that we replicate it across 2 regions for availability, but the users are getting it directly from the cloud and it's going right back down to the server. So you still have the Windows file streaming experience, but you don't need an edge cache. And so that's one of the things that changed based on the sizing and some of the testing that we did from latencies about how close you are to the compute to the data, where we still had edge cache deployments in some of the sites, and that's the plan, but we actually were able to alter and actually improve what the customers are able to do.
Okay, I was actually going to ask about your edge cache and your remote sites, because what I'd really like to know is that going to grow? Because I think that's a distinctive quality that Google has, is that outreach to the edge. But it sounds from your response that you actually think is not going to grow if you're actually not seeing the demand for the cache.
Is what part of it going to grow?
So I was hoping you would tell me you're going to have more locations and more distributed clouds and things like that, but I wasn't hearing that in your response.
Yeah, so this case was actually, the customer had 80 locations. We are consolidating that into 6 Google Cloud regions. We have 34 Google Cloud regions today, and we've announced at least 9 others that we're building out over time. So we're going to continue to expand the number of regions that we are in, and consequently the number of regions that Cloud Volumes ONTAP or Cloud Volumes Service will be available, in addition to increasing the number of networking points of presence that we have. So yeah, our growth is certainly not slowing down in terms of our building out regional
Didn't you announce last year 140 edge points around the world where you could...
It's a large number, but the Cloud Volume Edge Cache is different than the networking edge points that I was talking about. Right?
Oh, okay. Well, I was interested in the 140 edge points and how that would impact our customers, especially those with a distributed business environment.
Yeah, it really helps them just get into our network sooner, right? And then once you're on our network, it's all of our network. So you're not going through different providers. You're not going, so you have very predictable network performance, network latencies that you can size into how you architect the application.
Yeah, and do you see that growing? Because I come from I come from a service provider's background, and 1 point in one city is not enough. You want multiple points in the city, regional areas, etc.
On the caches, I think there's 2,000 edge points out there on that are today, and that's a lot used for just, again, wherever you are, just to getting into the network, right? And the sooner you're in, as you said, then the better. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it's large. So the real question becomes then is given, so one is giving the users the choice on, do you want to use that type of network and thing, or do you want to maybe save some and just use public internet in terms of how you want to access the different zones and regions? And then the second one is our strategy around, okay, well, now there's ways to push out into the edges and push into on-prem, right, in terms of the different offerings that we're building either on-prem or on edge sites as well, that then link into the sort of primary, 29 regions now that we have.
And is that exposed in NetApp? Can I control and see that in NetApp?
Yeah, well, maybe, Sean, you could say how many regions and where is NetApp in Google Cloud?
Yeah, so Cloud Volumes ONTAP is available in, I think, every region, maybe less one. Like some of the newest ones, as they come online, it takes a little bit of certification, but it's you can think of it basically everywhere. And then Cloud Volumes Service is in, I would say, probably 80% of our regions.
I really like what you both said actually there about to the edge, about how it kind of brings the edge closer to where your users are, and so we may never think about it as an edge and a core. We might just think of it as everything is the edge, and I can access my Google Cloud resources wherever I happen to be, and it may be over the public internet, and it may be over a private, direct link, but it's going to be there, and it'll be available when I need it, at the latency that I need it, with the performance that I need it. So that's excellent. It's a nice way of thinking about it, to change your perspective of what cloud looks like, what data centers look like. Is
the use case for backing as a CSI to GKE and that pattern in place? And I may be going outside the lines of where we are yet, but we didn't explore that use case yet. And I'm going to go all Kubernetes all the time now if you give me a chance.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the Kubernetes use case a little bit. I guess, the first question I think is there a role for persistent storage in Kubernetes? I think the answer we all say is yes. But how does file look, and what happens to it, and how are we, obviously Google is in GKE, but how are we working together with Google to make that easier for customers?
Yeah, actually, this feeds into some of the stuff we were going to talk about around the future and where file is going, right? And so, to my earlier point before, I think we need to continue the journey on making it simple and easy to use, and getting all of the enterprise management features that we know and love, and making them cloudified, if you will, right? Flexible, scalable, globally accessible. But then I think the next trend is going to be much more specific variants of file storage in cloud for the different frameworks that are emerging, like Kubernetes, right? I think we spent the last 5 to 10 years at this point integrating the two in terms of making them, CSI drivers, and making them easy to sort of launch, and hopefully abstracting away any of the sort of gory details. But I don't think we've done anything specific necessarily, in terms of the NFS protocol or in terms of the NFS client and other things to really adapt to per container requirements. And I think that is going to start to be a trend that we're going to see about, we're not just talking about a VM anymore, we're talking about very small microservices and how do we adapt to their needs, not to this VM's needs, if you will. And today we've tried to focus more at the abstract level because it's a little bit easier. But I think, two containers could have completely different needs running one right next to each other, and we need to start building storage that's going to adapt to those types of workloads and requirements. And some of them might be slow and large, and some of them might want really low latency and fast. And how do we co-locate apps like that, right? So I think that's like a really big evolution, and that I think will evolve over into serverless frameworks and all of the rest of the frameworks like as we move forward, right? Just really sort of adapting to their needs, and we're going to start seeing these specializations of.
Yeah, I think the idea of the container being able to consume directly TPU, GPU, and high-speed storage for persistence that also allows for other things to happen to the data that's in the storage layer. We're going to see those real, true, scale-out, purpose-built. Like maybe this is, again, this panacea type of thing, but looking in the pharma use cases that folks that I've talked to, in media use cases where they're leveraging container-based services, but they need high-speed storage, they need some persistence, they need to run other data management algorithms and data checking on it. So it's got all the right things, but the only compute layer that can keep up with it is scale-out containers. And so I see that as there. So yeah, I'd be interested to see as time goes on where we can build applications that can use this stuff. Right now it's intellectual and in kind of goofy use cases, but it's if we can find someone to build it, then we'll be there.
That's such a great note to end it on. I think that future and the possibility. So thank you so much, Dean and Sean, for joining me today. It's been really exciting and interesting having you here.
Thanks, Phoebe.
Thanks.
All right. Up next, we are going to have a classic field day element dating back to the very first field day, which is roundtable discussion. So we are going to invite our friends from NetApp back up if we want to add some more chairs here.
Going to be on the end.
And we are going to basically have a chance for everyone to discuss with the presenters, the delegates to discuss among each other. And as always with these roundtable discussions, the core question is kind of what you think it is, which is essentially, we've spent the day, we've listened to a presentation, we've seen some demos, we've had some questions and answers, we've heard from a partner, and it kind of gets down to the core question of multi-cloud. So I will actually pose that premise to my esteemed colleagues around the table. Who wants to kick us off here with a thought on modern multi-cloud? What does it mean? And what have you heard today that tells you what it means?
I'll jump in because we had to cut time off from some of the ransomware discussion. And when we discuss multi-cloud, that's probably one of the quickest ways that we move into, I have everything built in one location, I need to restore it into another location. So when we were talking about ransomware and the solutions that you have around cloud data sense, where are y'all looking at that type of recovery, ransomware detection, and solutioning?
Yeah, I'll take that. So, number one, acknowledge it's not only a multi-cloud but a multi-layer approach. Depends on where the threat is and where the layer of technology is. Nathan, you brought up Cloud Data Sense, which is a great example because it's one of the NetApp offerings that's not just restricted to NetApp storage or NetApp environments. Cloud Data Sense has the ability to view, scan, give insights, alerts, and reporting on lots of types of storage. Be it our traditional storage competitors, you might have an Isilon platform out there, an HP platform, or you might be one of the cloud formats that's not just a standard NFS SMB like OneDrive, SharePoint, or some of the object buckets. So Cloud Data Sense, to do its job well, we had to give it the capability to look at a lot of different types of stuff. Now, what we also have to acknowledge is I can look at a lot of places, bring a lot of value, and I encourage everybody, go to netapp.com or cloud.netapp.com and look at some of the dashboards that you can see, where you can see red and green light alerts on different environments where there may be issues and what it comes out. I'm sorry we didn't get to that today. Maybe the next cloud field, maybe Stephen will let us do another one and we'll get into that. But as you go deeper, you can see and alert on from them, but to take action, especially the autonomous action, sometimes we have to go deeper. As an example, if it's an on-tap environment and we're seeing anomalous behavior, like excessive serial encryption on a volume, right? That's not normal. And so the AI engine will see that and say, that's not normal, and have some steps it can take. Like, it can spin an immutable snapshot at that moment in time, so that if even you don't see it and get involved for an hour, that's your worst fallback. You may go up to the next level of user activity. So another layer of the technology stack is the cloud secure capability of Cloud Insights that can say, okay, a snapshot was given, but how about, what if it's not on just this particular file system? What if it's a user account on a lot of different, a really smart hacker that's going in different places? It'll identify that anomalous behavior and not only flag that, kick off the snapshot if it hasn't been, but block that user. So there's different layers you got to go to. And so we're kind of looking at it as a multi-cloud horizontal segment, and then striped this way, what is the layer of technology, and we'll bring value as high up the stack as we can.
I think the other thing to your specific scenario, I think if you've had a ransom attack and you're recovering, you're not going to be able to practically recover any significant amount of data to another cloud if it's not there already, right? Bandwidth, data gravity, not to mention ingress and egress charges and all the other things that make that impractical. So your only solutions there are to either point in time restore to the cloud you're on, making the assumption that the challenge that got you attacked in the first place is likely not something wrong with the cloud architecture, right? That's likely to be a black swan event versus a more standard spear phishing or any other sort of more common compromise, right? So most likely, like Chuck was saying, the ability to have those point-in-time snapshots that are already there, that are consistent across all the different clouds, right, and all managed within that sort of software, lets you recover to that point in time instantaneously. Anything that's not snapshot-based recovery for the data sizes we're talking about and the speed in which files can be encrypted, especially with hardware offload of encryption and everything like that, you're never getting it back if you're trying to stream it as a backup. The other solution is if you truly do want to have it as a cross-cloud sort of occurrence for ransomware or for, let's say, some massive denial of service attack or something like that, then it's having the data already there, right? So that's where the cross-cloud capabilities that Chuck and the team demonstrated to be able to literally drag and drop and have your data in two different places on two different clouds. It's like a mega availability zone, let's call it, or something like that, right? I made a term up. Yeah, MAZ, is that a thing now?
Hey, that's going to be over Twitter now.
Darn it.
Hashtag MAZ.
Did I trademark that? Wait, no, it's a NetApp work product. Darn it.
Think of an E because that would really be appropriate.
Yeah,
Because then
exactly.
it would be maze.
Maze. Multi-availability zone encryption. There we go.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think
we
it
made
brings up a good point that we have the challenge of the technology being able to prevent or like see and then ultimately prevent. And there's that weird trust of like, at what point will there actually be real application behavior that will emulate a heuristic that represents what looks like ransomware? The idea, then there's work, I was actually at SNEA last week, SDC, talking about other storage, services that are aiming to do the moment they see, as you said, sort of serial encryption beginning, that immediately it makes the files immutable. Yep. And so it self-detects, prevents, but there are genuine cases where there are things we're doing where, we could be using different architectures. Key value stores behave fundamentally differently in how they write and reallocate data on the fly, which can, by some good heuristic measurement, appear like it's doing naughty things. And then you've got this weird thing of, what's right? And all of a sudden, thousands of things get deleted all at once. You're like, oh, God. Oh, no, it's actually because I'm just cleaning up my M drive, right? Or whatever. Like there are tough things of user behavior that's normal or application behavior that's normal. And normal is such a hard thing to ascertain now.
And it varies by workload, right? There's EDA workloads or M&E workloads that involve, by definition, making 1 million files and then deleting them a couple minutes later, right?
Yep.
Not to mention AI workloads and everything like that. So if you apply the same heuristics engine without the right intelligence behind it and say, once you discover this to be the signature of an attack, just apply it equally across all your volumes, you're going to denial of service your own storage, essentially, right? By making all your files immutable, and then someone will be mad.
Well, to that same thread, so as we talk about security and stuff like that, I've loved what I've been hearing about the cloud managed capability, but I do have a certain level of concern about, like, we're now taking the storage layer that historically has been hidden behind multiple layers of things that block it from the big wide world. and now we're giving some manageability and observability to the outside world. What kind of controls do we have aside from just basic RBAC to prevent access, to control access to that cloud managed endpoint and things like that for our organizations? So MFA, ACLs, things like that. I mean, what are we talking
I'm going
about?
to add on that governance.
Yes.
Right, like overall overreaching governance from all the things that you mentioned, but also like data sovereignty, data residency, all that. Like, what are we doing about that?
So yeah, so specifically on the hyperscalers, say if you take AWS, there are keys. You take Google Cloud, there are service accounts. So we tap into what the clouds are doing in that perspective and just utilizing it for our own products within the hyperscaler.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. It's like, many of the conversations we have are around security and security policies and knowing who has access in the cloud sense. It's who has access to which resources, and it could be down to the individual resource, bucket name or it's a single EC2 instance or what have you. And so our policies are obviously, because they do utilize, say, AWS IAM, it's not, it's open. It's something that you can go in there and you know what our policy is asking your systems to do, whether it's provisioning or deleting or building a new one. And that's part of the, the transparency that the Google team mentioned as well, is you need to know what it's going to do. So it's aligning with them and then also using it as much as possible. But for my,
I was just going to say as well, you were asking about Cloud Manager specifically, it sounded like. With
Yeah.
Cloud Manager, you can configure federation so that it federates over to your own organization and then have MFA associated with that as well. Like
Okay.
every time we sign in, we have to approve a key or, hit it on Authenticator to be able to get in. So that's another line of defense that you were kind of looking for there as well.
So I'd like to extend it out, right? Because this is all talking about building the storage piece of it, right? So what happens when, the goal is to provide developers their playground to build an application or a service out to the rest of it. So so if I'm a developer and I'm consuming storage to display as part of a application, is that on them to keep that locked down to the right degree, or is that on the storage side to keep that locked down?
I mean, I could just start off with I got a mic, yeah. Thank you. I mean, everything starts off with a good cloud architecture, right, for your organization. And so, we have customers that have, thought they were going to start small, and then, they built sort of a very simplistic sort of architecture in terms of how the networking and their design of folders and projects and how we sort of lay that all out was relatively straightforward. And then they realized, oh, wait, I now have 300 teams in my organization. All of them are accessing different data resources. They all have sort of they want staging areas and production areas. Some of them are on-prem and they want to access data. And they, it gets really complicated. The point being is then they actually rewrite the entire cloud architecture in terms of the networking design, the project folder layout, the access control mechanisms and that. Then once they have that, then all of a sudden that's when NetApp would come into play and just saying, okay, well now we're deploying into that architecture, and then how do we make use of how they've set up the roles and the service accounts and the access control and everything else.
And somebody like from our side, the ops side, is trying to understand the best practices. Where would they look to get templates for that? Would we look to our very familiar on-prem storage providers, or would we look to y'all for that kind of out?
Who's the guiding reference?
Yeah,
Yeah.
From a governance standpoint, because governance and security are they're two separate functions, but they are related.
I would take responsibility into us in the sense that, as said, every cloud has their own sort of reference architectures in terms of how you build secure systems and deployments. And so I would say you'd want to probably start with the specific clouds, white papers and best practices guides that we have on our website, and work with our team, right, in terms of deploying that out for the organization. And then it's really about how do we complement all of that, right, with the storage services that we have.
I find that shared architecture. I mean, a lot of the white papers and on Google Docs, docs.google cloud, co-authored by NetApp, because we know that we have to fit into that ecosystem as well of however you've decided to architect your solution. So the reference architectures, we provide input into that, or help author them, and so that's where I would definitely start in the cloud provider. What Cloud Manager then does, or what the services then do, is give you that consistent experience. If you do happen to have that in other cloud providers, you know that there's going to be a way to achieve your high security or your compliance requirements, or your role-based access, because that's the NetApp promise in a sense of our products, that we will be able to deliver that capability to you.
In the end, all you got to do is just phone the Uber engineer, ask them their password, and apparently just give it away, and you take over the whole thing.
Yeah, buy a single password.
All this stuff doesn't mean anything.
Jeez, again. You're so positive till then.
I will say, to your original question, I think this is one of the interesting things we struggled with. If you go back 15 years ago and you set up a storage array, right, you put the management port on a separate subnet and you called it a day, right? And it was a little bit of, I don't want to call it security by obscurity, but it was close to an air gap, right? But not really. And I think that we all struggled with the first day you could actually manage a storage array but do it from the cloud, right? It was a brand new paradigm, right? For us or anyone else, and this isn't NetApp specific, I think this would be true for any of our competitors or cooperators in the industry, right? And in some ways, I even myself, I'll freely admit it, at first kind of was resistant to the idea as someone who's been around for a while, and it's like, whoa. But then you realize, I mean, the principles of zero trust and everything, you should assume that your management network is on the public internet, right? I mean, it's the assumptions of zero trust is that your data center is already compromised, right? And at any time it is compromised. And so the good thing about putting something on the public internet is it means you have to focus on the things that are truly important, right? Multiple admin verification, all of the structures that Google Cloud and others have put in place, because you can't just rely upon someone can't route to that IP address as a method of security, because that's not a true method of security anymore. So by removing that as a crutch, to be quite honest, and it's a really helpful crutch because it makes us all feel like we can fall asleep at night, right? That there's a firewall and it's a separate subnet and everything. It's not a valid crutch anymore. And so we've got to adopt more secure and more sophisticated methods for this age.
Yes, you bring up the perfect thing of assume it's compromised, and now what do you do? It's not necessarily about detection, pre-detection, and Pumla, to your thing about governance. This is something that came up when we talked about data sense before.
Yep.
And Chuck, yes, you brought up the thing of like, let's find a file owner, and it's connected to Active Directory. And the first thing that hits me is like, okay, it's metadata storage, but is it then maintained in an immutable state somewhere as a point over time? Because, Pumla and I say something naughty at our company and we get fired. And all of a sudden our Active Directory is removed. And so is that metadata, that the stuff that we touched right before we got fired, oh yeah, we did something naughty to the file system as well as just what got us knocked out of the company.
I'm always naughty, okay?
Is there, because that itself has to be maintained for an incredibly long period of time, because we don't know when it occurs. By the time ransomware started 2 years ago, really bad things happened today, but it was there a long time ago. And that's part of the problem, is having this sort of immutable, continuous record as a time series that you could go back and say a series of events occurred that I can go back and have this in this true sort of immutable reference to then go back and record that the thing that happened today actually began 6 months ago.
Well, not just ransomware, but what about litigation, lawsuits? They happen. People leave companies, and next thing there's a lawsuit over whatever situation. You've got to go back and dig up that data.
I'd say that's one of the advantages that NetApp has is having thought about this for a really, really long time, that people do keep data for a very long time. And so when it comes to moving that data into the cloud or having it in a different, suddenly we're starting to run different kinds of applications, we're still thinking about that, and that is still one of the things that, yes, we know that people are going to want to keep data around for 10 years, 25 years, the lifespan of a patient or whatever it happens to be. And that should be something that the data management system should be able to tell you. So I think that's one of the core tenets for us, is that your data requirements don't change, whether you want to run it in Google, you want to run it on premises. And the tools should be there, whether they are autonomous in the system itself, like what Chuck mentioned, where it's automatically taking a snapshot if it detects something that might be ransomware, to the more kind of, okay, I'm going to set a policy, and this policy is going to tell me when things are going to be kept, through to data sense, which is literally saying, what is that data? Where is it? So I think of it as almost a layer cake. I like food analogies. So a layer cake or pancake stack of data considerations that we have thought about through the years, and now we're bringing that across the board wherever you go.
Even as simple as the odd thing that happened, personally experienced this, right, where we had a full audit that was done. I worked in a large financial services firm. Just go over my LinkedIn, you'll figure out who they are. But we got regular audits, as we should. Proudly survived them all. But one thing came in, they said, hey, let's check, is this user here and this user was let go? Normal, like they were summer students. And then you go and you check Active Directory and like, they weren't deleted, they're right here. And then we realized like, oh, because they were hired back the next summer.
Right.
And so in that case where we had a file that was owned by somebody and then it was deleted or something, like an activity occurred triggered by a user behavior, and then we mark that and we say like, all right, good, immutable log, a record of that thing occurring, and then that user gets let go, and then you hire somebody that's their exactly the same first initial last name.
It happens.
Like, what are the records? Is it a UUID? Are there other things? Anyways, there's questions that you shouldn't have to answer to some idiot nerd like me on a panel right now, but things to think about as we look about
There's two
that.
things I want to say on that whole discussion. One is that, Lisa, can we please have DoorDash bring Phoebe Egg McMuffin, because she's obviously still hungry. Second is that one of the things that we're trying to do here is with our Cloud Volumes platform, because you bring up retention and things, remember, this is the customer's data. We're not becoming the data warehouse.
Right.
There is so much data that's available, but it's your file systems and your data and how long you choose to keep all of it. It's your data, it's your logs, your metadata is in your file systems. The problem is that it's been out there for years. If you go back to 1995, you could keep data for 10 years. You just couldn't figure out anything about it. You have an employee that left. He said, I did this. You could never prove it. So what we're trying to do is give the intelligence to be able to mine that data and make it available to you. If you have that lawsuit, you need to be able to show what did and didn't happen. Mm-hmm. But I just want to draw that distinction that we're not keeping, Cloud Manager is not keeping metadata about your data at all.
Right.
You have it.
But you're
We're giving you a
classifying,
SaaS
you're
service.
helping classify it.
We're classifying your data by tagging your data with the tags you wanted, but that's your data and your metadata. It's not in our account.
So we can search for it if we need to. If we need to find all
keep it,
1,000
you can
cat
search for
pictures
it.
of yours.
But you know what? If I in my account, I say, look, I don't want to keep anything more than 6 months. Nothing. Deleting all file systems, all objects, all this, all that. And 3 years later, somebody brings a lawsuit against me. I can't go to NetApp to say, I need to know what happened 2 years ago. Those logs are gone because that was my data. You know what I mean? And so that's the shared, and I think it was somebody, shared responsibility.
Correct.
Zero trust, shared responsibility, intelligence to allow you to do everything you need to in that model.
We in ITF call that not my circus, not my monkeys.
So I want to touch on, when we're discussing compliance, we're discussing governance, there's something that is kind of like, I don't know where it is, I always think of it as a step down from governance, but it's called standardization. And we always think of it in terms of like data, metadata tags, which you just brought up. What solutions in terms of like self-service and, not self-service, self-healing and automation tools can NetApp bring to the table in terms of, I have a gold, bronze, and whatever's between gold and bronze, silver tiering, and I've got a workload that's not bronze, it should be gold. Is there some sort of like self-healing there? I have a Kubernetes cluster that has different speeds. This one pod is supposed to be on this one solution. Is those type of self-healing? And then one last use case, which is PII, which you showed, which was perfect, but PII is really great when it's where it's supposed to be, and it's not always where it's supposed to be. So are these things that y'all are investigating, or are these things that you already have available?
Some of them, I can't say that we can solve all the problems in the world, but as an example, some
You
of the
could.
SLA
You
and
could
throughput-
say that.
I could say that, but I would get, sorry, Baxter's keeping an eye on me. Yeah, exactly. So first of all, in terms of some of the things that we showed here in terms of provisioning infrastructure for the type of job, we showed you some very basic, but there are higher levels where I can create templates that say, based upon this user in this role doing this type of job, here's the kind of infrastructure, which gets you part of the way there. You actually saw a little bit of that with the SAP HANA implementation. That can be templatized and automated so that if I'm doing an SAP HANA workload, it's always going to be the right level of storage, in this case with the right level of throughput. Happens a lot. You mentioned Kubernetes. Happens a lot because, as we talked about, it's incredibly dynamic. You know, I read about a month ago, 2 months ago, I read that the average lifespan of a node in a cluster is measured in seconds. Literally, it was like 87 seconds or something. It was crazy to me. They didn't even refer to it as minutes because it was fractional. This stuff comes and goes, and it's up and down. So making sure that you can have the right class of resource applied at the time, that's part of the automation process that we help with. And in addition to that, when you're looking at the monitoring, things like our observability capabilities provided by the Cloud Insights engine says I can have performance levels set. I can monitor thousands of things. I can have my dashboards set up that if something is not performing according to its SLA levels, it's flagged for me. And even more than that, the ML can learn as to what the likely steps are to take. It doesn't yet autonomously do things like, for example, if I have a number of processes running on a single node in a Kubernetes environment, and one of them starts to hog all the resource, start to write a whole bunch of files. I had, because sometimes these things are small amounts of storage. I had 10 gig assigned for these 5 because it comes and goes. It's ephemeral, shouldn't be. But all of a sudden, one of them is furiously writing and creating data, and CI says the other 4, soon I'm going to be out of storage space, and you're going to get an out of space condition sent to you. It will say these other 4, they're about to be compromised. You may want to do X, Y, and Z. You may want to spin up another VM, move this over, move the offender over, and provision more storage, for example. So we're getting there in terms of A, automate and templatize the provision of resources. B, monitor what's going on with the SLAs you set. We can't do it. So the user of the system has to set those. Monitor all these thousands of different points for storage performance, I/O throughput, network performance, compute performance, application and database performance, and let you know when you're crossing the red line. And if it does, provide you with, here's the next 3 things that we recommend you do. That's where we are today. I can't wait till next year when we have this same session and see.
Yeah, we need to see that ability to sort of stream that data for persistence somewhere else. And I think that's where more largely enterprises are getting to, where they ultimately, whether it's just, pouring it in and treating a Kafka subscription so they can capture stuff for their own stuff, but it's keeping it in some sort of time series database, as you mentioned. Not your circus, not your monkeys, my circus. So I could now, in using an ability to stream that data instead of wait for it to write, commit, pull it, like FTP it, SFTP it around the old school way, right? Team hardware. So, but I want to go now to, this data is being streamed somewhere. Can I stream it now to a central repository and then do other exciting things like fire Google ML services added and really see what's going on so that I can better operate my environment?
I think it goes full circle to where we very started at the very beginning of the day, which was that it's not just collecting the data about the storage that you care about, because if, okay, my storage is busy, so what? Maybe that's a good thing, but it's what is my workflow, what is my application trying to achieve, and that's where we want to get to as a holistic, with our partners at Google, with all the tools that we have at our availability, but also giving them to you, and then that might end up in a different system depending on who you are and where you happen to be. So I think we have one more question. I'm risking it. Let's do it.
Are we out of time?
No, you go. Let's do it.
At the beginning of the day, you said that multi-cloud initiatives have historically been happening by accident. M&As, whatever like that, somebody accidentally swiping a credit card. Yeah. And that now people are deliberately architecting for multi-cloud. How many, without saying anything, how many are you, what customers are deliberately creating multi-hyperscaler environments, and what's that use case look like?
Either of you guys want to take this? Do you have?
I'm one of them.
I can, but I
Does anyone like to say Netflix?
Yeah.
Give people the link. The mic.
I am a customer. Okay. I will not say my employer, but we are deliberately building a multi-cloud enablement program so that we can bring in officially additional cloud services that are outside of our current existing cloud platform so that it's governed in an enterprise way, because like you said, it was, I don't say it's accidental, but it was, things just came about, right? So you got to pull stuff together, and building a program like that is very, very complex, because you have to upskill your existing engineers that know hybrid, that know on-premises, but also the other cloud provider. But now they're faced with, oh wait, we have all these additional clouds that are now official. What's going to happen with us? Are you hiring new people? It's been a fun and rough 6-7 months for me personally. Challenging, and we're looking at it from a phase perspective. Initially, let's get these additional clouds up and running with all those foundational components, landing zones, bring them up first so they have all that governance, take lessons learned from the other side, bring it over, less technical debt, let's learn from our lessons from past mistakes so don't repeat it in the new clouds. And then let's build a new target operating model.
But is that the why behind? So I'm asking
The
for
why is cloud crazy, right? Cloud sprawl.
The why is cloud crazy?
Yeah, like it became madness. Well, not madness, but cloud sprawl. There's services out there that were getting deployed.
But that's still speaking to the first point of it, of the accident.
Yeah,
that's not speaking to
most of it is accidental, right?
So one of the other things is we live in a world of mergers and acquisitions.
Sure.
So two companies merged.
Yep.
One would have one cloud strategy, the other would have one other cloud strategy.
Right.
NetApp is kind of the link between the two. We cater to this cloud, we cater to that cloud, and make sure that.
But that's still the accident. That's not the.
You guys are all talking about the accident, right?
Well, I will say one more thing. I get the last word. So I do think that, okay, there's the choice to say I have different business units, they want to do different things, different applications, different clouds. But I also think that and there's obviously, I want to balance my risk. I think these are use cases that are valid, and they have, they're not necessarily something technical that they say, hey, I'm going to architect this. But I think there's that, really there's wanting to use the right tool at the right time for the right job. And that may change. So it's not to say that I'm multi-cloud because I am all in one cloud provider and then I'm going to start using another one and move everything there and maybe I'm half-half. It's because things change over time and that may just make more sense. I don't think that's accidental. I think that's an intentional decision to say I want to put it where it makes the most sense.
That makes sense. I get that.
It's a little bit of accidental, and it's a little bit of adapting to your business needs. As your business grows, your business needs changes, so you are adapting. 6-7 years ago, this was the need. But now that scope has changed and the business is actually evolving faster than IT, and it usually is. IT is usually the last to jump on the train because we're a little bit fearful of things. But it's businesses evolving to what the business wants to do to be competitive, to get, to basically make money. It's our paycheck.
The other thing is what if you're in the middle of, and I think the way y'all started off was perfect. We're talking about these workflows, right? So we're talking about these work pipelines, which that's all developer CI/CD talk until now that we're actually able to deploy everything as code to help them in the cloud, right? So maybe what the business needed at the time that they conceived the application and someone's on their laptop building it out in a particular cloud made sense to be on that cloud. But the services they need to scale it and deploy it globally and to make all the money off of it aren't available on the cloud they developed it on, but because IT now has become smart enough to understand what services are where, they can advise them, okay, we really need to go here, and here's the way we're going to get there, and this is how we're going to get there. There's some of that is kind of typical. The same things happened on-prem. Yay, I have a whole bunch of servers. If we put some VMs on this, we probably can do this faster for you and get more performance for it. And that happened in the middle. Always put the train tracks out in front of the train. But it sounds like you're trying to get ahead of doing that part, the train tracks.
A little bit of both.
Get ahead of the train. I like that.
Yeah, we're running along with the train.
Running with the train.
Yeah, trying to catch with it. No, it's a little bit of everything. It really is, because it's trying to get ahead, trying to wrangle everything back together so we're all not doing whatever. But then it's also like our business partners. They're evolving too. So we have to evolve with our business partners. It's a very complex question.
Yeah, really, we did pick a very last complex question. And I think this is a great discussion. Let's keep it going. We'll ask even more hard questions next time. But I'm going to just say thank you, a huge thank you to everybody here who came up, and also to all the questions. We've loved being here with Cloud Field Day, and we're so grateful that you gave us this opportunity to have a very exclusive day with you all. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to wrap up the live stream today. First off, I would like to say thank you, of course, to our wonderful presenters, especially our partner presenters joining us here on stage as well. Our delegates who came in, took time out of their lives to come in and join us for this presentation. Thank you as well. Those of you who are watching, this has been a really excellent experience for us here, and I hope that you that came through the cameras and that you saw that from where you are at home as well. If you missed any of this, just go over to LinkedIn. You can find it on the NetApp page on LinkedIn. You'll also find video recordings of this on NetApp TV as well as on the on YouTube, and you'll be able to catch up on any of the sessions you might have missed. Before we go, I will say as well, this could not have happened without Paula from NetApp back there. Thank you very much. And of course, the NetApp support team here. I don't want to leave you guys out. The Gestalt IT support team, Corey back home, and Prime Image Media. And we will be back. We will be back with more Cloud Field Day all week. So please just head over to techfieldday.com and look at that. You may see some familiar faces at Cloud Field Day to continue this conversation. I will also say as well that everyone around here, everyone here in front behind me, is very interested in continuing this conversation. Check out the delegates page on the Tech Field Day website. Look them up on your favorite podcast program. Look them up on Google. Look them up wherever they may be, and you will find a great many things. You will find video series, you will find podcasts, you will find blogs, you'll find articles, all showing the kind of thought leadership that you've been hearing every single day here at this event. So please do continue the conversation with them. And with that, I guess we are all ready to take charge of our multi-cloud environment with NetApp. That was the title here. So that's what we focused on all day long. So let's go ahead and take down the stream, and we will be back tomorrow morning at 8 for more Cloud Field Day.